Now this is mind-blowing. This is the world's fastest supercomputer, $600 million El-Capitan, which spans nearly half a kilometer and performs 2 quintillion calculations per second. Well, this ultra-advanced machine is soon going to be left in the dust, because Google has built a new computer chip that can perform calculations 1 nonillion times faster than today's fastest supercomputer. 1 nonillion times, that means this, 1 followed by 30 zeros, which means the kind of complicated calculation that would take the world's most powerful supercomputers 500 trillion times more time than the current age of the universe, this new Google chip can do in just 5 minutes. This is Google's new quantum chip Willow, which has officially announced the beginning of a new quantum age.
Supercomputers is the wild card. It could be a game changer. It could change the entire landscape of artificial intelligence.
Google's Willow chip is touted as not just another technology breakthrough, but an evolution. In under 5 minutes, the chip can solve a problem that would take today's most powerful computers 10 septillion years.
Until now, our poor, tired computers would barely double their processing power in 3 to 4 years. But with the arrival of these quantum chips, the entire game is going to change. Whether it's calculations to uncover the universe's secrets, calculations about where alien life could exist among billions and trillions of planets, technology to travel at the speed of light, the concept of creating wormholes or eliminating all diseases of the human body forever, just look at this research. It shows that with the help of quantum computers, easily extend human life to 115 to 200 years. We could even upload human consciousness into a chip or a robot and become immortal forever. All these technologies will no longer be just science fiction, but will actually become possible because of such advanced quantum computers. Before all this can become possible, there's still a big problem that's stopping scientists and engineers, that is, preventing these quantum computers from becoming fully operational in every home, like today's normal computer. Trying hard to solve this tricky problem is not just Google. Every major company, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, Intel, and others in this race are struggling to overcome these challenges. But what did Google invent that suddenly gave it the lead, leaving all these tech titans behind? Google's quantum computer is designed like this, but IonQ, which is also a US-based company, has a quantum computer that looks like this. While a Canadian company, Xanadu, has a quantum computer that looks completely different. So if all these computers work on more or less the same principles and processing power, why do they all look so different? So what's the difference in their technologies, and which one is better and which one is worse? And speaking of Google, with this new quantum chip, what all will Google now be capable of doing? Let's understand that in our today's technology special video, where I'll explain everything to you right from the very basics, like what even is a computer, how we reached from a 2,000-year-old computer to today's quantum computers, and how the technology sector was able to fully evolve and become revolutionized, how exactly a quantum computer is different from a classical one, which quantum principles it uses to perform calculations, how it's billions of times more powerful, and what are the challenges scientists are still facing in bringing this cutting-edge invention to your home and mine. 15th September, year 1900, some Greek divers were diving near an island off the coast of Greece called El-Capitan, when they suddenly discovered a sunken ship. Inside this 2,000-year-old wreck was a treasure filled with jewels and statues. But hidden among this lost treasure was something else, something so unique that it would go on to haunt scientists for decades to come. It was a 2,000-year-old machine. And then, after nearly 50 years of research, when a scientist named Derek Price examined it using X-rays to see what was really inside, this image was revealed. He was shocked to discover that this was no ordinary device. It was an incredibly advanced machine containing at least 37 interlocking gears made of bronze, some with teeth smaller than even 1 millimeter. These gears worked in such precise coordination that having this level of technology 2,000 years ago seemed almost impossible. This was an astronomical device. It could calculate solar and lunar eclipses, the phases of the moon, the positions of planets and stars, and even predict their future movements and cosmic events. This revolutionary device was named the El-Capitan mechanism, the oldest computer to ever exist on Earth. Now you might wonder, why was it even called a computer? Computers look like this, right? So in what sense was this ancient gear-based device considered a computer? And if that's the case, can we call modern electronic gadgets like TVs, microwaves, geysers, or water purifiers computers too? Well, to answer that, let's first understand the fundamental ABCDs of what even a computer is in the first place. Look, in the simplest language, the word computer means any machine that can compute, that is, perform calculations and predict accurate outcomes. And that's exactly why even a basic calculator is technically a computer. Back in its time, the Antikythera mechanism codified the universe's principles into numbers and translated them into mechanical movements. Just like modern computers today codify the principles of IT and electronics into operations using algorithms. And that's why the earliest computers weren't born in electronic circuits. They were born in mechanical circuits. And according to many scientists, the kind of advanced computing technology seen in the Antikythera mechanism didn't reappear for another 1400 years, and then came a major milestone in the history of computers. In the year 1642, a 19-year-old French mathematician built an early prototype of what we now call modern calculators and computers. And yes, it functioned mechanically. This device also used gears, cranks, which, when the dials were rotated, would display answers based on the numbers you input. This early calculator was called the Pascaline, and the genius behind it was none other than Blaise Pascal, who was deeply inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's calculator design and turned that vision into reality by enhancing it. But as you can see, the Pascaline was still a very large device, nothing like today's pocket-sized calculators, and it could only perform addition and subtraction, not even multiplication or division. However, this model ended up inspiring a brilliant German scientist, Gottfried Leibniz, who took it a step further by fixing its limitations and building his own version called a step reckoner, which could now perform all four basic math operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, this calculator was definitely quite advanced for its time, but even then, it still couldn't handle many important types of mathematical calculations, like calculating polynomial equations. Remember these kinds of equations? We learned these back in school in algebra. Gear effects is the polynomial function. That is the main answer we are trying to find. Now, just imagine, how could any calculator from that era possibly solve such equations? Even calculating the logarithmic and trigonometric values of numbers was impossible. And by the time the 19th century arrived, as you know, the British had become explorers and colonizers. That's why in navigation, in sailing, even in engineering and banking, the need for advanced and fast calculations had become very important. That's why, out of necessity, people at that time had started using printed maths tables that looked like this. Now, do you know who used to make these very important tables? Well, us humans, manually. And we humans are experts at making mistakes. That's why, from calculations to translating into different scripts to printing, if even a tiny mistake happened anywhere, then a ship could get lost in a stormy ocean, or the structure of a building itself could go wrong. Like in year 1707, due to these same wrong manual calculations, not one but 4 ships were destroyed at once, and in total 2,000 sailors lost their lives. This is known as the Scilly Naval Disaster. And that's why there was this one person who raised a big alarm about this silent danger. This was none other than our father of modern computers, Charles Babbage, who at the time showed harsh facts to the government. He told the government in figures that every few months the government was losing at least 2 to 3 million pounds because of such outdated, manually printed math tables. And while pitching the solution to this problem, he introduced his revolutionary computer model, the difference engine, which would later become an inspiration for modern computing. Difference engine was his first computer model, which could easily solve such polynomial equations. It could also calculate logarithms and trigonometric values. But he didn't stop there. His computer could do complicated mathematics. But like today's modern computers, it wasn't programmable, right? Meaning, the numbers you input inside it would directly give you one output answer. You couldn't teach the computer new knowledge or language through codes so that it could process the input in a new way and solve new type of problems. Today, we can't even imagine computers without programming. And just this thinking gave birth at that time to the design of his most sophisticated model, the analytical engine, which became the world's first concept of a programmable computer. I said concept because it was so far ahead of its time that it could never actually be built back then due to lack of funding. But if it had been completed, it would have been 30 feet long, 10 feet wide, a proper modern computer, running not on electricity but on steam. Now, do you know something interesting? Do you know how codes were written at that time and how they were fed into the computer? Well, through these punch cards, which were manually designed. This is what the world's first computer programming codes looked like, which together made the algorithm of the computer. That is, they fed instructions on what output to give for which input. One of Charles Babbage's students, Ada Lovelace, who was very good at maths, she wrote the world's first algorithm for the world's first computer, the analytical engine, in which she had fed the steps to calculate the series of Bernoulli numbers. And from here, as you can imagine, computer automation had begun. Programmability had arrived, along with the concept of memory storage and ALU, meaning arithmetic logic unit. But, okay, let's accept these computers had become programmable, but they were still mostly mechanical, right? And anything that's mechanical still requires human effort. And on top of that, mechanical systems are usually slow at processing, need a lot of parts, and end up taking up a lot of space. And that's why, if we truly wanted to build advanced computers, we had to think beyond mechanical computers, to learn how to leverage some fundamental force that can process information far more rapidly. And what could that fundamental force be? Well, the answer to that was with Thomas Edison. Yes, Thomas Edison, who's credited with inventing the electrical bulb. But very few people know how these very bulbs played a huge role in the making of modern computers. The fun fact is, he himself never even knew about it. Now, check this out. In 1883, while Thomas Edison was researching his electric bulbs to find out why these bulbs failed after some time, he noticed something interesting. He saw that only one side of the glass area of his bulbs was getting coated over time with a brown colored layer. But why was this happening? Because inside the bulb there was nothing else, only the burning tungsten filament, that too in a vacuum. Then he placed a metal plate inside that vacuum-sealed glass bulb, which is usually negatively charged and is called an anode. Now something very interesting happened. As soon as he applied a positive voltage on that metal plate and switched on the bulb, the electrons, since they are negatively charged, because of the positive voltage, immediately started sticking to that plate and a current began to generate. But right there, when he applied a negative voltage to that plate, no current was generated. Now, what exactly was this current and why it was being created? Edison himself did not know at that time. That's why he named this current the mystery current, and he even got it patented, saying, if this current ever turns out to be useful for something, we'll handle it later. And Edison's instinct proved right. This current, which people began calling Edison current, went on to change the world, becoming the backbone of electronic circuits and bringing about the digital revolution. Basically, idea is very simple. Edison current essentially taught us how to control the flow of electrons. And learning to control electrons means being able to build electronic circuits which later help in creating advanced computers and technologies. Now, let's understand how a circuit can be made from this simple principle with an easy example. Look, this is a simple circuit where a conducting metal plate is placed before the electrons hit the glass walls of a light bulb. The electrons collide with this plate, and to smartly regulate or control them, there is a special grid placed in between. The job of this grid is simple. It acts like a valve or tap, allowing the flow of electrons to pass through or stopping it altogether. And this grid works by applying voltage, just like we saw earlier. A positive voltage attracts electrons more strongly, letting them flow faster, while a negative voltage slows them down or even stops them completely, depending on how much voltage is applied. This simple circuit is called a vacuum tube. And that's why it might surprise you, but the very first large electronic computers actually ran on thousands of these little bulbs called vacuum tubes, working together to process information. They were room-sized machines, 80 feet long and 8 feet tall. Take ENIAC, general purpose computer. When it ran, it felt as if thousands of bulbs had switched on at once. Engineers used to joke that during winter, they didn't need heaters in the room. Until very recently, even our old CRT TVs used these same vacuum tubes. That's why they used to heat up, remember? This technology lasted for a good 60-70 years, and during that time, we saw tremendous progress in communication technologies like telephones and radios. This circuit could be used to amplify signals, meaning it could make the sound louder and clearer. And by switching the electron flow on and off, it could be converted into binary, the language of 1 and 0, the very language through which computers and electronic equipment using codes can produce the desired output. Which means our computers had now shifted to electronic goods, and there was no longer any need for those punch cards. But even then, computer operators still had to stand in front of computers for hours. Why? Because 40-50 bulbs used to blow every single day, and they had to be replaced immediately. That's why scientists had already realized that these room-sized computers were not very practical. They consumed far more resources, guzzled energy, produced huge amounts of heat, and because of that, they were far more error-prone. So what if we could fit this exact same technology, this exact mechanism, into a very tiny circuit? Well, in 1947, three brilliant scientists, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley at Bell Labs conducted a very successful experiment. They showed that by controlling the flow of electrons using an object as small as a grain of rice, it was possible to do the same job, and that experiment effectively opened the door to the end of vacuum tubes era. If electrons could be controlled using something as small as a grain of rice, then what was the need for those huge bulbs that could blow at any moment? That rice-like tiny material was actually a semiconductor called germanium, which would very soon be replaced by an even more efficient, high heat-resistant material. Silicon, the one we now find in every phone and computer today. These transistors were much faster, consumed far less power, and were dramatically smaller in size compared to vacuum tubes. And from here, the Silicon Age truly began. Do you know why California's Valley of Heart's Delight came to be called Silicon Valley? Today we think of Silicon Valley as the hub of tech and software companies, but originally tech companies here started with computer hardware, not software. Universities like Stanford University supported innovation by leasing land to students and startups, helping early companies like HP build hardware, and that's what laid the foundation for Silicon Valley. By the 1950s, IBM, Honeywell, and Fairchild Semiconductor, whose people would later go on to form Intel and AMD, had already arrived here by the 1950s. The region was steadily becoming a hub for technology and silicon semiconductors. And that's exactly why it came to be known as Silicon Valley. But the advancement of computer technology didn't stop there. It moved one level further. Earlier vacuum tubes had to be connected to each other using wires, and that's why computers used to look so messy and full of tangled wiring. The same problem existed with early semiconductors as well. Those semiconductors had to be connected using wires. And due to that, the computer size could only be reduced by about 30 to 40%. But then, in 1958, a major breakthrough happened. Jack Kilby of Texas Instruments invented the concept of integrated circuits, or currently known as ICs. The motherboards, RAMs, and SSDs you see today are based on this idea, where many semiconductor components are placed together on a single circuit board. This was the very technology that Jack Kilby invented. And after this, it was as if computer technology, powered by new silicon transistors, had suddenly grown wings. Computer size reduced, energy reduced, parts reduced. This entire development brought down the cost of a computer, which once used to be $7 million to just a few $100s, plus also made computers portable. But even then, if you're thinking that BCS had already become compact, you'd be wrong. They were still about the size of a mini fridge. Why? Because the era was yet to arrive. Something Intel would finally announce in the 1970s. What a beautiful concept it was, that you could fit the entire circuit of a complete computer into a device small enough to sit in the palm of your hand. That was the true power of microprocessors. By releasing its very first 4004 microprocessor, Intel showed the world what was now possible. Inside this tiny microprocessor was an entire integrated circuit switches to control electron flow, arithmetic logic units, integrated memory, and much more. Just imagine. where we started from massive computers and where we've reached today, all the way down to a single microprocessor. With this confidence, Gordon Moore, the CEO of Intel, even proposed a principle. From now on, processor performance would double every 2 years, and this would be possible by doubling the number of transistors inside a processor every year. But how was this even possible when the space inside a processor is limited? Well, by shrinking the size of silicon transistors. And that's why, if you look back in 1970s, do you know how many transistors were in the first microprocessor this set was released by Intel? And how big they were? Well, it just had 2,300 transistors, and each one was 10,000 nanometers in size. For comparison, today's latest processors from Intel contain 150 crore plus transistors. And you already know how tiny they've become, just 3 nanometers. A 3 nanometer transistor is so insanely thin that it's only about 20 atoms thick. See the progress of microprocessors in just 50 years. But just like with every era, things eventually fades with time. This race of microprocessors has now come to its end, because how much smaller transistors can you possibly make? Maybe maximum 2 nanometers small. The road for electrons to travel will eventually become so narrow that electrons will literally start wandering out of their paths, and circuits will begin to malfunction, becoming error-prone because of heat and electromagnetic interferences. Sure, maybe by using 3D technology, we can cram more transistors, but beyond a point, practically, scaling down is not that easy. Physics doesn't allow that, and that's why no matter how much we try, from here, technology will not be able to grow exponentially like it did in the past few decades. And that's why Moore's law, which doubled transistors every 2 years, now takes 4 years. But as you know, when one door closes, another one opens. Human progress had never stopped before, and it will not stop now. Today, so many brilliant minds are not going to sit around and regret their fate doing nothing. In the 1880s, when we shifted from mechanical computers to electronic computers, our processing power increased literally millions of times and the size shrank hundreds of times just because we exploited the principles of electronics. Could there be some principle, even more fundamental than this, that could give us millions of times more processing power than today's modern computers? Well, it turns out the answer lies in quantum theory and quantum mechanics, a science that makes even the rules of reality itself feel unreal. According to IBM Vice President Robert Sutor, for a normal classical computer to create even a one-to-one simulation of a simple molecule like caffeine, it would require 10 to the power of 48 bits of information. Do you know how much information that is? It's 10% of the number of atoms in our entire Earth. This is because quantum reality is extremely complicated, and you simply cannot understand it with classical computers. This exact thought gave birth for the first time in the 1980s to the idea of quantum computers. And do you know who first thought of it? Think. Well, just like today, we look at 19th century computers as nothing but mere calculators. Quantum computers have already begun to show the true face of our current computers. Even today's super advanced computers, compared to them, are nothing more than simple calculators. So what exactly are these quantum computers? Which principles do they exploit to let us build computers billions of times more powerful? How Google's new quantum chip did in just 5 minutes? What would take a supercomputer 725 trillion times longer than the age of the universe? And how very soon we will be able to discover alien life, cure all diseases, and extend human life to 150-200 years, all with the help of these quantum computers. But how was this even possible? Well, I'll explain all of these in great details, along with the entire evolution of the quantum computers in part 2 of this video. Because this video is getting too long, part 2 will be even more interesting, fascinating, and educational than this part. We'll discover so many secrets of the universe that probably you didn't even know. It'll also show you a glimpse of what our future might look like. So if you are a true science fan, you cannot afford to miss this episode on quantum computers. Stay tuned until I released the next part, which will be within a week. And if you're watching this video a week later, perhaps that part has already been released. And I'll put a link somewhere here. So see you very soon in the next part. Until then, stay tuned and stay curious.